We are moving into the lightning presentation piece of our program. And I would just note that if you haven't noticed, this symposium is very intentionally a cross-section of women at all stages of their careers. And it's part of our work to build a C3E community that can really support the recruitment. You've heard this before from some of the speakers: recruitment, retention, and then advancement of women in this field. And so one important piece of that is, of course, students. So we turn now to them. And we will have lightning presentations from 9 undergraduate women from around the country. They've come here today to share their work on a variety of clean energy topics with you. And each presenter will have 3 minutes to present, and then we'll answer 1 audience question. We hope you enjoy hearing about the amazing work these young ladies are doing as much as we do. And I'll turn things over now to Sarah Gallegos, Mighty's Student Engagement Coordinator, who will introduce you to our presenters.
Good morning. Thank you. Again, I get the pleasure of introducing each of these outstanding undergraduate women to share their research with you. So first, we are going to have Luca Borsuk from University of Hawaii at Manoa. She's a junior majoring in mechanical engineering. Come on.
Thank you. So today I'll be talking about effectively transparent front contacts for solar cells. And this work was done this summer at Caltech with Professor Harry Atwater and Dr. Rebecca Suff. Now look closely at the surface of a solar cell and you'll find that it's covered in a metal grid. This is an electrode that collects and transports electrical charge, and while absolutely necessary, it blocks the sun from hitting the area of the solar cell directly beneath it. So if we could reclaim these shadowed areas, what would we get? A device with more photocurrent and a higher efficiency, even without changing its footprint. So the question we asked was, how can we make these front contacts effectively transparent? To do this, first we recognize that in the case of flat contacts, instant light simply bounces back towards the light source, where it can't be used by the solar cell. Our design, therefore, would be 3-dimensional and pyramidal in shape, such that instant light hitting a sidewall would be redirected downwards, where it could be absorbed by the active surface. To do this, we took a laboratory solar cell device and first lithographed a grid of flat conductive contacts, and this would serve as a foundation for our pyramids, which we made with NanoScribe, which is a super cool 2-photon absorption printer that prints with nanoscale resolution. And then finally, we deposited a thin film of metal on the sidewalls, such that they were very reflective. And here we have the reflectivity of our contacts. In the case of flat contacts on the left-hand side, you can see that those bright white stripes mean that light is bouncing back towards the light source, back to our eye. However, in the case of our 3-dimensional contacts, they appear much darker. That's pretty cool. It means that light is being redirected. And in some areas towards the top, they almost seem to disappear, and these are areas in which the geometrical fidelity of the contacts was quite good. So we quantified the photocurrent in some of these areas and found that we could regain up to 99.96% of photocurrent. And that's what I mean when I say that they are effectively transparent. We also put our devices under a simulated solar spectrum and found that we could, in laboratory devices, increase the current density and solar cell efficiency. To think about the future of these contacts, of this technology, I'll first say that it's still in basic research stages, and work on commercialization has yet to be done. However, I can talk towards scalability, which is a huge issue in the nanotech world. How do we get something small made on a big scale? And towards that, we're looking at a gravure-style printing process. So if you can imagine that making these contacts could be as fast, as similarly cheap and easy as printing a roll of newspaper. So with that, thank you, and I'll take questions.
Hi, Erica. I'm Besma. Thanks for your presentation. I used to work at First Solar, so I know how every little bit of efficiency really matters. It looks like a lot of your experiments were done with very direct sunlight. And I worked in the Middle East, where it's a lot of diffuse sunlight. You get a lot of pollution, a lot of sand. How have you seen the effectiveness of your contact when you've got kind of this diffuse sunlight coming down? Thanks.
That's a great question. As you noted, we use a very collimated beam that's perpendicular to the surface of the solar cell. But simulations done by my mentor, Rebecca Sev, indicate that the three-dimensional contacts are more effective than planar contacts or flat contacts between the angles of 0 and 35 degrees of incident sunlight. So there's that. The other piece is that we might think about pairing this technology with a tracked panel, photovoltaic panel, which I believe is the direction the industry is moving in, at least in terms of utility scale, PV farms, single or double axis tracked. And then finally, since it is still in the research phase, I would say that we might end up moving the contacts closer together. So right now they're about 40 microns apart, and somewhat counterintuitively, if we make the spacing a little bit more dense, we might get this kind of funnel effect where photons could bounce from one sidewall to another and finally down towards the surface of the solar cell. So, question, thank you.
All right, next up we have a sophomore here at MIT majoring in materials science and engineering, Reva Butte.
Thank you. Right, good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about my work in biofuel synthesis, namely 4-methylpentanol, or 4MP. So why are we talking about 4MP? With a branched methyl group configuration and a longer carbon chain length, 4MP intrinsically exhibits a high octane number, or the efficiency to burn in an engine, as well as a higher energy density than both isobutanol and an E10 ethanol blend. So 4MP presents itself as a viable, sustainable fuel, but while it is currently efficient to consume, yes, it is not yet efficient to produce, and that's where my project comes in. So in order to alleviate this, I first looked at the current pathway for producing this biofuel, which was developed by my lab and converts glucose into 4MP and other byproducts using only enzymatic conversions. From these titers, which from the right to the left represent the product, 4MP, the byproduct, isobutanol, and the unwanted intermediate, isobutyrate, I determined that there was a bottleneck or buildup of isobutyrate in the system that was limiting 4MP production. And so what this indicated to me is that the enzyme that is used to convert isobutyrate into isobutyryl-CoA, known as IBUA, was not doing its job. I proceeded to hunt for alternative enzymes that would be able to complete this same enzyme conversion. And I found one family of enzymes called the propionate-CoA transferases, or PCTs. Through literature review, I selected 2 enzymes from 2 different host organisms, known as Clostridium propionicum, or CP, and Ralstonia eutropha, known as RE, that I tested in my experiment. I then cloned the genes that encoded for these enzymes into engineered plasmid vectors, then taken up by E. coli cultures. I then inputted a feed of isobutyrate and measured an output feed of 4-methylvalerate, or 4MV, using both liquid and gas chromatography. So this bracketed process essentially was performed in order to assess the enzyme conversion efficiency of my different setups. Those setups being the first with no enzymes, the second with the PCT from CP, the third the PCT from RE, and the fourth with the previously used IBUA enzyme. And this was my crucial finding. I found that the PCT from the CP organism could convert isobutyrate into 4MV at an efficiency of 29.4%, which is over 350% more efficient than the previously used IBUA. This indicates that the PCT from the CP organism could alleviate the bottleneck in isobutyrate buildup in this pathway and be used as a crux for future study in 4MP production pathways. This work also sheds a hopeful light on the viability of metabolic engineering to develop sustainable sources of fuel for generations to come. And finally, I would like to thank Dr. Christella Jones-Prather, Dr. Book, and the entire Prather Laboratory for helping me conduct this work, as well as Shell Oil Company and Mighty for funding it, and of course C3E for hosting me here today, and all of you women for being so welcoming and inspirational. And now I'll take any questions. Thank you. Thank you. So next up, I would say, I guess just to peek back at this pathway here. This pathway in the top right corner is the full pathway that goes from the glucose into the biofuel, as opposed to this bracketed pathway. So what's next would be to assess how the PCT enzyme reacts in the total pathway. As in this bracketed pathway, we've eliminated other variables. So that way we could see how the efficiency of 4MP production compares to that of previous studies. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Olga Yle Silva from Case Western University, and she is a senior majoring in materials engineering.
Well, thank you for being here, and I will discuss the degradation of polyethylene and its relationship to photovoltaics, solar cells, and wires. So why do we even care about the degradation of a polymer? This polymer is actually used to coat the outside of every single photovoltaic wire. And along with that, it readily degrades in UV radiation. Kind of counterintuitive if we're putting it up with solar panels. So if this degrades to a point where the copper contact is revealed, it can actually touch the metallic surfaces that hold up the photovoltaic cell and cause fires, as demonstrated in the picture above. This is standard, is established to prevent this by UL. However, the UL standard is only for America, and it is not internationally recognized. So the wires that we get from China, Germany, and the US have different chemical compositions and different lifetime performances. While photovoltaic cells are rated for approximately 20 to 25 years, these wires are not. So I evaluated how these particular wires degrade over time. I did an indoor accelerated exposure as well as an outdoor real-life exposure, followed by an outdoor exposure with an electronic load to mimic exactly what they would experience if hooked up to an actual solar cell. Using FTIR and chemical analysis, we found that the degradation pattern of the commercially available wires that we studied differs from the UL predicted degradation pattern. So this is a problem. If we cannot guarantee the safety of these wires, we cannot guarantee the safety of residential homes and schools that these panels are being put on top of. So since there is a difference, I propose that UL reevaluate the standard that is established. And since this standard is based off of the theoretical pure polymers that is usually studied in a lab. There's no additives, no plasticizers, no dyes. The commercially available wires do have all of these. So UL standards should mimic the commercially available wires rather than the theoretical polymers that we study in a lab. So I will now entertain any questions. Yes.
Has the UL expressed any interest in your work?
They actually fund me. So they have expressed a lot of interest, and right now they are reviewing the publication that has come out of this. So we'll see what that leads. Okay, thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Anastasia Korla, who is a junior at Tufts University majoring in physics and mathematics.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about verifying tritium release models. Okay, so what is a tritium release model? Tritium is a radioactive isotope of hydrogen that's often used in fusion reactions. So a tritium release model models the release of tritium from a fusion reactor into the atmosphere, and then using environmental transfer models, models the release of, or models the movement of tritium through the environment and to people. So fusion reactors have seen something of a resurgence lately. I mean, there's been the new ARC reactor here at MIT, and ITER, of course, is still in development. And fusion could possibly be an excellent source of clean energy. Nuclear energy currently accounts for about 11% of the world's electricity generation, and fusion could provide a much safer way to do that. However, it's important to know how safe fusion is exactly. So we can use tritium release models to sort of get an idea of that. However, a lot of these tritium release models are almost 20 years old by now or older. So what does this mean? Well, 20 years ago, when they were using the models to run calculations, they had a lot less computational power available. This meant that to actually do the calculations for the model, they needed to use a lot more simplifications. Now, these simplifications usually came in the form of simplifying integrals so that the actual code didn't actually have to run any integrals. Nowadays, we actually have a lot more computational power available, and we can actually find numerical solutions to these integrals a lot faster, and we can find a lot more solutions. I mean, back then, they wrote everything in Fortran. Okay, not everything. They wrote in Fortran, and nowadays we can use Mathematica, which is a more sophisticated computational tool. So when we actually compare the models, we see that 20 years ago, the calculations they got with their simplifications were 3 orders of magnitude less than what we get today when we run the same model without the simplifications. So this is in units of becquerel per volume. That's a unit of radioactivity, not actually a radiation dose. So you can see from the graph that not only is the concentration higher, it's higher for longer. Okay, so what does this mean? So if these models that they use to estimate the safety of fusion reactors are underestimating risk, then they might also be underestimating final dosages to people and the safety of fusion reactors as they calculated them 20 years ago might have been overestimated. So by more accurately recreating these models and redoing these calculations, we can actually get a better idea of how safe fusion reactors are. So going forward, we're going to look at modeling the rest of it to find the actual radiation dose risk to people. Right now, we were just looking at concentration in air. We're going to actually look at what does the final dosage end up being for people. Okay, now does anybody have any questions about this?
I'll ask a question. Kate Hawley, Rocky Mountain Institute.
Yes.
I'm curious to see how this might transform the market. So if this is like what and how does this apply in a market opportunity? So
fusion reactors right now are not quite yet commercially viable. So that's maybe around 30 years down the line, more or less. So this wouldn't change anything right now, but it could dictate what happens going forward in the future. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, we have next up another sophomore from MIT majoring in material science and engineering, Caroline Lowe.
All right, so today I'll be talking about my work with lanthanide metal coordination polymer complexes and their potential application as a protective coating on offshore metal structures in the energy industry. So currently, there's a growing interest in offshore energy resources. For example, offshore wind power is just starting to gain momentum in areas like Rhode Island, and we're seeing a new wave of interest in harnessing the energy of the ocean. As a result, there's a need for a better protective coating to protect these offshore structures from the corrosive effects of the ocean. Now, this is where lanthanide metal coordination polymer complexes can come in. Inspired by muscle fibers, which are made up of iron-rich proteins, these polymer materials have strong mechanical properties and are self-healing because they are bonded to metal ions. In my work, I use lanthanide metals, europium, terbium, and lanthanum, because they also make the material luminescent under UV light. And the color that the material emits can change in response to environmental stimuli. So imagine coating this polymer material onto offshore metal structures and using their luminescent qualities to signal if there is a change in pH, temperature, or pressure that might damage the structure. This work is still in its early stages, and so before we begin to develop this as a commercial product, we first need to better understand their luminescent qualities. So to study these materials, I make beads out of them because they are good test models. The polymer I use is alginic acid, which when I dissolve in water forms alginate. Then, droplets of the alginate is added to a lanthanide metal salt bath to form these lanthanide coordinated with alginate beads. Finally, the beads are coated with a ligand to pyridine to enhance their luminescent qualities. When the beads are excited with UV light, europium beads appear red, terbium beads are green, and lanthanum beads are blue. If you combine all three lanthanides into one bead, you make a yellow luminescent bead that can also change color in response to different environmental stimuli. For example, these beads are naturally acidic with a pH of 4, but if you subject them to a pH of 8, which is about the pH of the ocean right now, they turn pink. Likewise, heating them from room temperature to about 90 degrees Celsius causes them to turn gray, but then they regain their original yellow color once you cool them back to room temperature. So far, I have developed a stable model to study these lanthanide-coordinated alginate complexes. And preliminary tests show that these materials are stimuli responsive. The next steps in my research are to quantify their luminescence and the toughness of the material, and to see if I can correlate increasing mechanical stress to changes in color. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
Do you think there's a way that you could maybe also use this technology on a wind turbine to keep birds from running into it if they could actually see this luminescence? And or when the things that you're doing now, does it keep whales from running into this? I'm just thinking this of...
Yeah, so they are actually luminescent only under UV light, so they don't emit color under natural light.
All right, next up we have Myla Moskowitz, who is a junior at the University of Maryland, College Park, majoring in environmental science and technology.
Hi, so today I'm going to be talking about methane inhibition from anaerobic digesters to microbial fuel cells. So manure is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. One way to curb this is by using it in anaerobic digesters. Anaerobic digestion is using a waste product to create a biogas, which can in turn be used to generate energy. So what my project looked at was using the effluent, or the liquid product, from anaerobic digesters as a food source for microbial fuel cells. Now, in anaerobic digesters, methanogens, or methane-producing organisms, are dominant, whereas in microbial fuel cells, iron-reducing bacteria are dominant. So what we wanted to do was to inhibit those methanogens so there was no competition and the iron-reducing bacteria could grow optimally. So how we did this was through a biochemical methane potential test, where we loaded inoculum as a microbe source and manure as a food source. We then created anaerobic conditions and continuously measured for biogas with a gas chromatograph. On the 5th day, when we had maximum biogas production, we added our different inhibitors, then created anaerobic conditions again and continued to measure for biogas. What we added was 1, iodoform, 2, BES, or 2-bromoethane sulfonate, 3, a 30-minute air purge, or 4, a 24-hour air purge. So what we found is the bottom line is our iodoform worked really well at inhibiting our methanogens. The 24-hour air purge worked well for 4 days, but then biogas production continued. Our iodoform is BES is the yellow line, which worked really well at reducing methane production, but not completely inhibiting it. And the dark blue purple line is our 30-minute air purge, which didn't really work well at all. So what does this mean? This is particularly useful for people who are doing research in anaerobic digestion or microbial fuel cells, but also in wastewater treatment. In wastewater treatment plants, they already have anaerobic digesters that they are using, but microbial fuel cells could be the next step where they are able to harness more energy.
So depending on which inhibitor you want to use, if the retention time of your microbial fuel cell is less than 4 days, you can use either of the 2 chemical additions or the 24-hour air purge. If it's greater than 4 days, you should stick with either of the 2 chemical additions to make sure that there's no methane production later on. Thank you, and any questions?
Thank you. Can you comment on the mechanism of the BES or the iodoform, please?
So the BES and the iodoform are both specific inhibitors. So they shouldn't affect the iron-reducing bacteria, but what they do is they affect the enzymes of the methanogens, so they can't produce any more methane.
Do you know which enzymes?
No.
Thanks.
Okay, next up we have Isabella P Notes from Florida Atlantic University. She's a junior majoring in ocean engineering.
Good afternoon. So I will be talking to you about assessing the energy from the Gulf Stream using it for ocean current renewable energy. So we all know that renewable energy has become so popular now, so now the research and development is underway for ocean current renewable energy for the US, Japan, South Africa. Multiple countries are starting to get involved. So in the top picture right there is a simulation of what a turbine array would look like, similar to what a wind farm is starting to look like. We took that as an example. The bottom 3 pictures are showing already testings for different companies and research places. Southeast National Marine Renewable Energy Center is already testing propeller rotation, while the other 2 pictures in the middle and on your left, right, I don't know, are testing their prototypes. The middle one is the Aquantis prototype from a company from Santa Barbara, California, and the Anadarko prototype is from a company in Texas. So to understand what kind of turbine we should create for the Gulf Stream off the coast of Florida, we need to understand the energy density coming from the Gulf Stream. So the picture on the top is from HYCOM, the Hydro Coordinate Ocean Model, which is showing the surface currents globally over a span of 3 years. From this data source, we were able to use the kinetic energy flux equation to figure out what our average current energy would be off the coast of Florida, which can be seen on the picture on the bottom. But our research team and I wanted a more precise number, so we had to take our own measurements. Our measurements were used from 3 different sources. 2 sources were public data that anyone can see, and the third source was data that we ended up using. The first public source was the drifter measurement system, which is from the World Ocean Circulation Experiment, which used buoys around the world. The second public source, which can be seen in the middle pictures, is an acoustic Doppler current profiler, which was mounted to the bottom of a boat, which traveled between the Bahamas and Florida. That location and path can be seen in the bottom picture on the top. The third source, which was used with my school, Florida Atlantic University, and Southeast National Marine Renewable Energy Center, we used a bottom-mounted acoustic Doppler current profiler, which can be seen in the other picture. And we posted it in I think off the coast of Jupiter, which can be seen on the map at the bottom. These measurements, which allowed us to show different types of data, the data from the drifter measurements, you can be seen in the picture all the way to your left, shows the location of the buoys off the coast of Florida all the way to North Carolina. The top right picture shows the bottom-mounted acoustic Doppler current profiler on the boat, and the bottom right picture shows the bottom-mounted one. And these 3 data sources show the average can be about 3.0 kilowatts per meter squared, which is 50% more than what the numerical data showed. These data sets also show us what the perfect location for our turbines were. Thank you. Any questions?
Hi. The one project I'm familiar with was in the East River in New York, and the propellers fell off. And so are you going to take this to the next level to find out how these streams are affecting the viability of the equipment?
So what this research was just for location and everything. The next step, like you said, is the design process. So each location for the turbines are going to be have different designs because each stream or each ocean area or current area is going to have a different energy density. So some designs may or may not work in certain places because of the energy density. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Ming-Ting Qiu, who is a sophomore at Harvard College, majoring in chemical and physical biology.
Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be talking to you about catalyzing the oxygen reduction reaction with manganese-3 hangman porphyrin. So we're interested in oxygen reduction reaction, or ORR, because it's the reaction that occurs at the cathode of fuel cells. And briefly, fuel cells are important to the sustainable energy question because they're able to convert the chemical energy stored in hydrogen and oxygen bonds into usable electrical energy. But the current problem with fuel cells is that their reactions are catalyzed by platinum, which is an extremely expensive catalyst. So there's been a hunt for cheaper and earth-abundant catalysts. My lab in particular has been looking at metallated porphyrins, and in particular, we found that manganese-3 tetraphenyl porphyrin is able to catalyze oxygen reduction. So we were interested in studying the hangman version of this porphyrin, shown at the bottom here, in order to determine its catalytic ability towards ORR, and also the reaction mechanism that this porphyrin induces on the reaction. So to achieve our goal, we first had to synthesize this target porphyrin at the bottom shown here. And this required 3 steps, the first of which being forming the porphyrin. And then we had to deprotect the methyl ester group to form carboxylic acid. And lastly, we inserted the manganese into the porphyrin. After we synthesized our porphyrin, we had to perform some electrochemical experiments on the porphyrin in order to determine its catalytic ability. And the first experiment we performed is called cyclic voltammetry, or CV, which is a method used to study redox active molecules. And this experiment basically allows us to plot the current generated from the reaction as a function of the potential applied to the solution, which includes our porphyrin and some other stuff. And the purpose of this experiment is to determine if our catalyst is redox active or not. Here you can see a graph of a CV that we took, and we were interested mostly in the leftmost wave because when we add oxygen and acid to the solution, which are necessary for the reaction, we see that there's a huge increase of the current, and this large increase of the current tells us that our porphyrin is catalyzing the reaction. And the second experiment we performed is called rotating ring disc electrode, or RRDE, which is similar in setup to CVs, but here the purpose is to determine the efficiency of our catalyst. And we do that by determining the amount of hydrogen peroxide formed versus the amount of water formed by the reaction, the hydrogen peroxide being the undesired product, and then the water being the desired product. Here you can see a graph that we obtained using RRDE, and as you can see, the amount of hydrogen peroxide formed is extremely low, or below 2%. And so we were able to conclude that our Faraday yield in water was 98%, which is extremely good. So in conclusion, we were able to find that our manganese-3 hangman porphyrin is redox active and catalyzes the oxygen reduction reaction with pretty good efficiency. And although we're still in the process of determining the mechanism for this reaction, we think that this is a promising approach to designing better catalysts for fuel cells. And I'd like to finish by thanking my PI, Professor Daniel Nocera, as well as my mentors, Dilek and Guillaume, and also the rest of the Nocera group who helped me with this project. And thank you all for listening. Any questions?
Hi, excellent presentation. A couple of quick questions. How does the performance of this catalyst compare to platinum? And then secondly, how are you going to actually test it on a fuel cell next?
Sure, that's a very good question. And I'm afraid that currently we're at a pretty preliminary stage for this catalyst. And so it doesn't quite match up to platinum yet. But it is better than a lot of the other catalysts that we've tested previously. It's better, it's faster, and it's more efficient, as I mentioned. I think the next step towards putting this in fuel cells is to be able to actually do this reaction in water, because currently we're in an organic solvent, acetonitrile, and that's not very good if you want to use it in fuel cells. So the next step would be to put it in water. And also, for us to be able to determine the mechanism of the reaction, we'll be able to help other scientists be able to better synthesize or look for different kind of catalysts that corroborate the mechanism of the reaction and hopefully be able to progress down the road from that. Thanks.
Okay, finally, we have up our last presenter, Julia Belk, who is a junior from MIT in electrical engineering.
Hi. So this summer, I did research on magnetics for high-frequency power converters through the MIT Energy Initiative. And first, quick recap of power converters in general. So the rectifier in your laptop charger is a really familiar example of a power converter that everyone uses every day. And that converts sinusoidal voltages and currents that come out of the wall outlet into DC voltages and currents at your laptop input. And these devices are everywhere in modern electronics. So power conversion research has 3 goals: making smaller, cheaper, and more efficient converters. And one way that recent research has been achieving these goals is by designing the circuits inside the converters to operate at higher frequencies. One roadblock to doing this is that to design these converters, you need data on the magnetic materials for your inductors and transformers at the frequencies you're going to be operating at. And because converters have previously been designed at 1 megahertz or lower frequencies, this data wasn't available at higher frequencies. So here's, you can see some standard manufacturer data that covers this frequency range, but there is a gap of data in around the 2 to 20 megahertz range, which we think is very good for realizing smaller converters. So we went out to gather this data for a lot of materials in this frequency range, characterizing it for its efficiency, which is the data you need to design your magnetic components. So to measure the material and get the data that designers need, we built an inductor with the material we're interested in, a toroidal inductor, as pictured here. And in essence, we resonated it at the frequency we were interested in, and then measured how damped the resonance is, which you can do simply by measuring the amplitude of the output voltage and the amplitude of the input voltage. And that shows how damped the resonance is, from which you can tell how efficient the core material is. So here you can see our results. And the thing to note is that on the y-axis is a performance heuristic, so higher is better performance. And we found materials that are significantly better than those that manufacturers had previously made data available for. And that suggests that you can build smaller and better converters by operating at higher frequencies using these materials that were not previously measured for these applications. So if anyone has any questions, thank you.
What's the cost profile of the other materials that we've used that would have better performance at these different frequencies?
So these are all fairly standard materials that were shown in all of these plots. They're very comparable on cost. The difference is just that the materials we measured had typically been used for radio frequency applications and just hadn't been measured in the same way, but they're all very comparable on cost. Thanks.